So this is lesson 5, not lesson 6. So if you can do me a favor, first thing you can do is you can cross out the 6, make it a 5, and cross out the part 2, and this is part 1. And again, in theory, this should mostly be review. What we're going to do in today and tomorrow, next class, and the following class is look at projectiles. And this first day, we're going to do in one day what, Neve, you probably spent an entire week or 2 doing in Physics 11. And then we're going to say, okay, here's the Physics 12 level, and here's the nasty Physics 12 level. But stuff that I still consider fair game. So you ready? Projectiles. Oh, got to pause. Let me see here. I got a visitor. Projectiles. So when we launch an object through the air, we call it a projectile. Sanj, incoming. Hands ready, please. Okay. That path that it traced out is called a parabolic trajectory, short for parabola. And one of the reasons you look at the parabola so much in junior in Math 11 is because it does have a bunch of applications in physics. Back, please. Projectiles travel in curves, in parabolic trajectories, and actually, mathematically, it is possible to analyze it all in one fell swoop. There's an entire branch of mathematics that looks at curves. It's a geometric branch of mathematics, but it's kind of yucky. And what we're going to do then with our high school math skills is we are always going to break every projectile up into components. So, I wrote down here example 1. Break the following velocity vector into its vertical and horizontal components. So we're going 24 meters per second at an angle of 36 degrees. If I was going to break this up, my abbreviation for horizontal is the letter X, so I call it Vx. My abbreviation for vertical is the letter Y, Vy, using graphing notation. Let's get tricky with it. Neve, that 24, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? I agree. Vx, opposite or adjacent? Adjacent. Which trig function can I use to find Vx, my child? Did you say cosine? You would be right. So it's going to be cosine of 36 degrees equals Vx over 24. Yes, it's 1 fraction equals 1 fraction. In fact, I think, Neve, Vx equals 24 cosine of 36 degrees. $19.4 meters per second. Greg, Vy, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? I have no idea which. Opposite? Now, Greg, I could use Vx since I just calculated it. I could use tangent, but then I'm using a value that I calculated to find another value, and I want to avoid that. I want to use the 24. Which trig function, kiddo? I agree. In fact, Greg, you may notice that my equation looks almost identical to the Vx equation, except the only difference is instead of sine, I've got cosine in the Vx. In fact, you may notice when I cross multiply, when I get the Vy by itself, I'm starting to write cos, good gosh. The only difference is there is a sign. The 24 reappears and the 36 reappears. In fact, if you have a good calculator, if you listen to my speech, you can probably just go second function, enter, or backspace, or whatever it is on your calculator, and simply back edit and change the cos to a sine and hit equals. Mr. Dueck? Yes, Sean? I'm noticing here that if we're launching from the ground going upwards, like in my picture, the horizontal is cosine, Vx is cosine, and Vy is sine. Will that always be the case, Mr. Dueck? Yeah. So, Mr. Dueck, you're saying that if we're launching from the ground going upwards, Vy will always be sine. You know, Mr. Dueck, if you were a good teacher, you'd have some stupid way that I could remember that Vy equals sine. Yes, Sean, if I was a good teacher, I would have some stupid way that you could remember that. But I got nothing, so you're on your own. I apologize. Key ideas. Whenever you launch a projectile at an angle, actually whenever you launch a projectile, we're going to break it up into horizontal and vertical components. The key idea in the horizontal component, fellas, the key idea in the horizontal component is that Vx is constant. And what that means is that my horizontal acceleration is 0. And this is the one that kids struggle with the most. They want to put an acceleration into the horizontal equation. They want to put a number in for A, and in fact, most often they put a negative 9.8 in, but that's vertical. And I went on a big rant yesterday about direction, direction, direction. When we did our vector questions, I said, don't you dare put a north-south velocity into an east-west displacement or a slanty velocity into an east-west displacement. Your directions have to line up. But this idea that the horizontal acceleration is 0, that's one that kind of bothers kids. I will try and convince you right now. I'm just going to walk straight ahead and I'm going to throw this straight up. If the horizontal acceleration is 0, as I keep walking, it should continue moving and it should come right back down to my hand. It shouldn't end up behind me. It shouldn't end up in front of me. It should ideally come straight back down to my hand, which I think it did. It continued moving at a constant speed, matching my constant speed. And if I had a higher ceiling, I could even toss it higher, and I would find that it would actually come straight down. Basketball players, you can try that in the gym sometime with a basketball walking forwards and see if you can get it to come straight back down to your hand and do some good physics. Why is that so nice? Well, that means that D equals VIT plus a half AT squared. If A is 0, becomes just D equals VT. Oh, I added the X's there to remind myself when it's horizontal, when it's horizontal, when it's horizontal. And you're going to notice I become fairly fussy about my notation in this next couple of lessons because I'm trying to prevent myself from putting the wrong direction into the wrong direction. And so if I can prevent myself by writing a little bit of extra subscripts, which takes basically no time at all, then Gabby, I'm going to do that. Okay? What else does this mean? Well, it means that if you know the time of flight, you can find the horizontal distance, which is also called the range. Or if you know the range, you can find the time of flight. You're going to find in projectile questions that, Logan, most of the time, no pun intended, you spend finding time. Oh, in fact, you're going to find if they give you the time of flight, the question's pretty wishy-washy and falls apart. You're going to spend most of your time finding time. And how you find time will be determined by what kind of information that they give you. Vertically, we have a changing velocity, but the acceleration is constant. Good old negative 9.8 meters per second squared. That means, and you'll notice I wrote here little y's. That means vertical displacement is initial vertical velocity t plus a half. You know what? I should have, all of us right now, I should have even put a little y on that acceleration to remind myself that that's important. Vertical, 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 vertical. Unfortunately, vertically Sanj is a bit messier because here, because the t squared canceled, this went from being a quadratic to being a nice grade 8 linear equation. Here, the quadratic often will be stuck around. This is where we may have to pull out the quadratic formula on occasion. Although, I will show you a method that bypasses the quadratic formula and is only 2 lines longer. And those of you that are struggling with the quadratic formula and don't have built-in quadratic solvers, you may find that even though it's 2 lines longer, it's faster in terms of actual time spent than using the quadratic formula. Little note. At the top of its arc, the vertical velocity is 0. Does this mean that v is 0? Cole, back row, incoming. Ready? So at the top of its arc, for a split second, oh, that's a terrible toss. Let me try that again. Enzo, ball back. You can do better than that. Try to get just below the ceiling. There we go. At the top of its arc, for a split second, the vertical velocity was 0. Does that mean the velocity was 0? Yeah, see, if the velocity was 0, it would have been hovering in one place there. It was not. In fact, you know what, you can say at the top of its arc for any projectile, v equals vx. The overall velocity for that split second is just your horizontal component. Back. Couple of more things. If you're starting from the ground and you're ending up on the ground, I told my physics students last year, what goes up must come down. Your initial vertical velocity and your final impact vertical velocity will be the same but opposites. Vy initial will be negative Vy final. That only works if you're starting and ending on the same height. If you fall further, you'll be speeding up. Or if you hit a cliff and don't fall as far, you won't have gotten as fast. This is better to apply, so let's try some of this. Example 1. This is physics 11, and then we'll kick it up into physics 12. A projectile is launched from level ground at an initial velocity of 200 meters per second at an angle of 38 degrees. I find for any projectile question, I have to draw a little picture. So, there's my cliff. Oh, not a cliff, Mr. Dueck. Sorry. No cliff. Good gosh, brain. My velocity at an angle. Yoink. I was doing the next question already. Where was I? How fast is the velocity, Doug? Pretty fast. How big is the angle, Doug? And I'm going to break that into Vx and Vy. I'm going to break that into horizontal and vertical components. So, on a test, and I've done this speech before, but it bears repeating, Sanj, I'll probably show my work wherever possible. In my homework, I don't mind if you take shortcuts. So who remembers which trig function is going to be Vx? You know what? Vx equals 200 cos 38, and Vy equals 200 sine 38. And again, if I was a good teacher, I'd come up with some dumb, clever way that you could remember that Vy was sine, but you'll have to come up with something on your own, clearly, because I'm letting you down here. And on my calculator, 200 cos 38, 157.6, except I go to 2 or 3 sig figs, so 158. And Vy, 123. Okay. Enzo, what's part C asking me to find? Can't find it. Okay. Not yet. To find anything in this unit, in this distance, velocity, acceleration, time unit, to find anything, you may notice if you look closely that every single equation has 4 variables in this unit, and you're going to need 3 to find 4. So to find the time of flight, I'm going to need some kind of a displacement or some other piece of information. Do I know the horizontal distance this projectile traveled? Everybody say no. No. Do I know the vertical distance this vertical displacement this projectile traveled? Everybody say yes. What is the vertical displacement? Okay, so to find the time of flight, I'm going to solve this vertically, not horizontally. And as soon as I decide that, I tend to write as a little heading to emphasize to myself, don't you dare use horizontal stuff. And as soon as I write vertical, the first thing I always write is AY, that's not a 9, that's an A. Try that again, Mr. Dueck. AY equals negative 9.8. The vertical acceleration, as long as we're here on the Earth, negative 9.8. Oh, and we did calculate Vy initial. What was Vy initial? 123? Now that 123 is rounded off, Sean. If I want to be really uber careful in my calculations, instead of typing in 123, I could actually type in 200 sine 38, which isn't that much more typing than typing in 123. And I know that's not rounded off at all. What else do I know? I need 3 things to find the 4th. Well, someone has told me that my vertical displacement is 0, and that works. We're trying to find t. Put your pencils down once you've written that down. This method is perfectly fine. Which equation has A, V initial, D, and T in it? You could go, don't write this down, and then you could go, don't write this down, 0 equals 123t minus 4.9t squared. Where'd the negative 4.9 come from? Okay, half of 9.8. You could do all that. However, what kind of an equation is that? It's quadratic. How do I know? It's got a squared. How am I going to? I'm going to either factor or quadratic formula that, which is lengthy. That's valid, but Ellis, we're not going to do it that way, which is why I said don't write that down. There is something else that I know vertically. I know Vy final only because I'm starting and ending on the same height, only because what goes up must come down. I can actually say Vy final is negative 123. Why is that nice? Because now I can avoid that quadratic. I'm looking for an equation that has these 4: acceleration, V initial, Vf, and V final.
Vf squared equals Vf squared. That's 280.
No, you're using the letter D, and I don't want to use D, and it doesn't even have a T in it, and I want the T. It has to have a T in it. In other words, what I'm saying, Andrew, is don't use that. Can you get the T by itself in your head, please, Logan, and press me? Now, I gave you the old provincial exam formula sheet, and you've been away for a couple of days, but you'll have to translate when you just see a V, that's a V final, and when you see the V naught, British, that's a VI, right? Anyways, okay, I can do this. I'm going to get rid of that crossing out the dy, because we can use that, but let's make it easy. Now you're at the point, by the way, you know enough physics, where now instead of saying, how do we solve, I can say, what's the quickest way to solve, because we have more than one option. I think it's going to be this. In fact, I think we're going to find negative 123 minus 123 all over negative 9.8. Although, I'm not going to type that on my calculator. Doug, how many numbers are there on the top? So brackets, except do you notice I actually have stored as my most recent answer that 123, except way more accurate? So I'm going to go like this. Negative answer, because that's negative 123. Take away 120 answer, divided by negative 9.8, and that'll give me nice and accurate. I'm trying to get you folks good at using some of the bells and whistles on the half-decent calculators that hopefully by now most of you have purchased. I get 25.1. In Physics 12, I tend to put a box around my final answer. That's sort of my spiking the football when you get a touchdown routine. You're going to find this year there are questions that are 7, 8 lines long. In fact, I know there is one question that you'll be doing.
We now have
Hang on here.
11 students, last name A.
Sorry. As I was saying, go ahead. In about February, I have one question in mind that is, I kid you not, about 15 lines worth of work. It's rocket science. It's calculating how much potential, how much fuel you would need to send a satellite into a stable orbit at a given altitude. Doing that much work, there is something satisfying after doing 15 lines and going, ta-da, putting a box around it. Also, though, it makes it easier for you to keep your work organized. So I tend to put a box around my final answer or make it stand out, highlight it, underline it, whatever. Get organized is the whole point of that little rant, Amanda. So time of flight, 25.1 seconds. Nils, what's part D asking me to find? Is it Nils? Till. Nils sits there in my other class. Wrong name. I'm sorry, Junge. Ach, du Schreck, was ist los mit mir? Schade, ja, sehr schade. Till, mein Jung, what's part D asking me to find? First, just read it to me. What does it say? Okay, find the range. Range is a physics word. Range refers to a distance. Which type of a distance? Horizontal or vertical? Horizontal. So all of us, because now we're committed to horizontal, Till, I suggest that we write as a little heading to remind ourselves, now we're horizontal. Horizontal. Okay? And as soon as I write horizontal, cut it out. Horizontal. I'm trying to emphasize the direction. That's why I'm cutting you off each time. Thank you. I write that. As soon as I write horizontal, I know that. Oh, I also know Vx. What was Vx? It was, I got to scroll back, 158. And what did we say we're trying to find here? Dx equals. Right now, this can't be done because right now I only have two things. I can't use two things to find a third. I need three things to find a fourth. There must be something else I know. The reason I had to do part C. Now, I think I said this yesterday, but it bears repeating. In Physics 11, I would have walked you through all of these steps. Not anymore. I would have no problem telling you a projectile was launched at an angle of 200 meters per second. Find the range. And I'll expect that you'll clue in, I guess I better break this up into components. I guess I better use one of those components to somehow find the time of flight. Once I have the time of flight, I guess I better now go find the range. Now, Jordan, that is all as far as I'm concerned fair game. By the way, is there an equation, Jordan, my friend, that has A, B, D, and T in it? Doug's got a sheet next to you.
Yeah.
Which one?
Vertical.
Can't be. We're doing horizontal right now.
Oh, well then,
An equation.
Equals VIT. That's just.
Why did Doug cleverly cut you off? Okay. And he was saying, don't waste your vocal cords even. So we can go dx equals vxt No need to write the half AT squared because horizontally it's 0. And again, I found, Enzo, the most common mistake. The kids that don't write this down. The kids that do write that, they want to put a 9.8 there because they don't like the 0. But 9.8 is vertical. You cannot put a vertical into a horizontal. So the easy solution is train yourself to not even bring it up. Jordan, what was I trying to find? Oh, and that's by itself already? This is straight plug and chug. It's going to be 158 times 25.1. Now, Jordan, I rounded that 158 off, but it's not that much effort for me to go 200 cosine. What was the angle? 38 or 36? 38. That was only like 2 extra keystrokes from typing 158, and that's dead accurate. And I could go times 25.1, but I notice I have it stored as my previous answer, not rounded off at all. So I'll use my answer button. See how clever I am? And I get, wow, almost 4 kilometers? Yeah, actually, you know what? That's legitimate. That's actually about right. So that answer seems okay to me. I was initially, Enzo, going, wow, 3,900 meters, 4 kilometers. Yeah, sure. Oh, that also means, based on this, Enzo, what's part E asking me to find?
Vertical height.
I'm willing to bet this is fairly high, too. It's a cannonball. What did you say part E is asking me to find, Enzo? Did you say vertical? Then I'm going to make a little heading right now. And as soon as I write that, right away I know AY is negative 9.8. Those two in my mind just go together. Oh, and I know VY initial. It was 100 and, what was it? 123? Mr. Dueck? Yeah, Duncan. How come you put an initial on this velocity right here, but you didn't bother putting an initial on the horizontal velocity? Oh, that's a great question, Duncan. How come I didn't bother putting an initial on the horizontal velocity? Oh, horizontally, since there's no acceleration, initial is final. Is, okay. Cool. What else do I know vertically? Sorry? Oh, you're saying I know Vy final? How do I know how fast the vertical velocity is at the top? Oh, for a split second vertically, it comes to a stop. Is that 3 things? I have enough to find the 4th. I could probably find time, or in fact, somebody last class said, couldn't you just divide the time of flight by 2? Probably, but I might avoid that just in case I got the time incorrect. I'm looking for an equation that has AY, V initial, V final, and D in it. Which equation has A, V initial, V final, and D in it? Okay, Yvonne, which one? I know, but I also notice I don't see any color on your table as though there was some kind of a formula sheet. You know, if your teacher had been clever, he would have given you 2 formula sheets, one in bright yellow and one in bright blue, so that they stand out so you could always have one handy if you had a clever teacher. I'm just saying.
V squared.
Stop. Get the D by itself, please. I'll give you a hint. D equals... And just to remind myself, I'll put Y's, and to just make sure I go vertical, vertical, vertical. Because the other common mistake I sometimes see is kids want to put VX in, or they want to use that 200 as the initial. You'll notice, by the way, that 200 that was slanty, we have never used. We found the components, and then we chucked that 200. It doesn't appear anywhere else. This is going to be 0 squared minus 123 squared all over 2 times negative 9.8. I don't know if you remember when I covered the 4 kinematics equations, I think 3 lessons ago, I said to you there are some teachers that don't teach this equation. And it's true, you can survive without it. What we could have done is we could have solved for t and then solved for whatever we needed to. Fair enough. This equation annoys me because kids get stupid on this equation. The most common mistake, and I see it time and time and time and time and time and time again. You guys with me? The most common mistake, kids write the squared. They don't hit the squared on their calculator. And I see it always because I'll see a wrong answer, and when I type in their numbers, leaving the squareds off, that's the wrong answer that showed up. So, squared is all I can really say to somehow drum it into your head. That won't be the only time you hear that barbaric yell, by the way. There's about 5 other equations that have squareds in them that kids love to leave the squareds up. There's one in particular that's really, really long. And I know why. Kids are so concentrating on typing everything in that when they get through all the hard stuff, and they forget to hit the squared at the end because that's the easy part. So be careful. Cole White, how many numbers on top? How many numbers on the bottom? So you're saying brackets on my calculator? Good call. Yep.
We on a test didn't know if you had like 123 on page after you rounded it, but there's a more specific answer in the calculator.
Yep.
If we used the 123 and then so forth, just did that and got our answer, would you mark that wrong on test?
The rule is you don't round off until you have to, so the answer is if I expect you to be accurate to 2 or 3 sig figs in your answer, and the method that I'm showing you now will get you there. But if you're someone who likes to round off all the time, it won't, and I will take a half off then. Most of my written questions are worth 7 marks apiece because that's what it used to be on the old provincial exam, and I've continued that marking scheme, which works out well. It means I can give out lots of part marks. I would give you 6.5 out of 7. So it wouldn't affect you that much. It would be more like a little splinter that annoys you, even though you can perfectly make your way through the day. You know, it'd just be by the end of the day, you'd be ready to just cut your finger off and get that splinter out because that's a lot of the nitpicky stuff. That's how I try and mark, just to annoy you to fix it. Good question. Maybe your best question of the year so far. No, it's not worth a candy. Okay. Again, as I mentioned before, Enzo, I would have no problem simply giving you the first paragraph at the top of the page and then saying, find the maximum height. Not walking you through A, find the Vy, V, find Vx, find time of flight, not walking you through any of that. Now, if I finished my test early, I might be tempted to take this time here, which is all the way up and all the way down, divide it by 2, which should in theory give me the time to get to the top, and try finding dy using that. And if I get the same answer both ways, well, then I know not only is this answer right, but all my previous ones are, yay! We are at the stage, Neve, where we have 2 or 3 or sometimes more methods that we can use. If you got a test done early, try the other method and just confirm that you got it right. Or if you're getting wonky answers, try the other method. Turn the page. Physics 12. What makes this Physics 12? 2 things. 2 things. Tanisha, can you see an angle in degrees? We did that in Physics 11. Can you see a cliff? We did that in Physics 11, but we never did them in the same question. We launched horizontally from a cliff, or we launched at an angle from the ground, but angle off a cliff, that's Physics 12. And the reason it's Physics 12 is you need the quadratic equation, the quadratic formula to solve these. Okay, I fibbed, actually. I will next class show you an alternate method that's 2 lines longer, but doesn't require the quadratic formula. And those of you who have weaker calculators or don't have built-in quadratic solvers, you may find that even though it's 2 lines longer of writing, because it's less calculator typing, you may find in terms of actual time, it may be faster.
To the remaining grade 11s, please head up to the mini gym for photos, please. The remaining grade 11s. Thank you.
You ready? Greg, can you read to me, please? Out loud. Go ahead. Cliff, okay, we're going to dump. How high was the cliff, Greg? I'll label that. Keep going. Add in. 64 degrees. I'm going to eyeball it. 45 degrees is halfway, so 64 degrees, a little steeper than that. Kind of about like that. How fast? And by the way, we won't be using the 36 after 2 lines. We'll never use the 36 again. Okay. And Greg, what's it asking me to find? Did they tell me time of flight? Really what they're asking me to find is time of flight. That's what I'm going to spend most of my time finding. And you'll notice this time I haven't walked you through all the steps. I've gone straight to saying, well, find this, please. Okay. What am I always going to do first if they give me a projectile at an angle? Begins with letter C. Components. So I'm going to draw them in quickly here, Doug. There's Vx. There's Vy. I draw them in with dotted lines to remind myself that they weren't actually part of the original question, that I'm modifying the diagram. What was Vx? I think there was a dumb way to remember which trig function it was. Cos. So 36 cos. Oh, I forgot to put the 64 in there. How about I do that? Put the angle on your triangle. It always helps. Cos 64. Now, Sanj, this is actually, remember the question that I said was a great question? I was kind of hoping you'd ask it now. So you ready? In the previous question, as an actual question, did I ask you to find Vx? If you turn back a page, was there actually a letter where it said, find Vx?
No.
Read very carefully, please.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I actually, as a question, said, find Vx. I would always like that, because that's an answer you're giving me, 2 or 3 sig figs in your final answer. Now here, I haven't asked you to find Vx. You're using it, but I didn't specifically say write it down as an answer and give it to me. I'm going to carry a few extra sig figs. In fact, this one, I think I'm going to go 15.78 to 4 sig figs and carry an extra digit, because that seems like a nice place to round off, because there's a 1 after the 8. Yes? Hey, which trig function was Vy? I got nothing to remember that with. Again, I should emphasize, it's a great shortcut, but it only works if you're launching upwards at an angle. Having said that, it's what I made up back when I was in Physics 12 in 1987. Sanj, I'm going to carry a few extra digits here. This is kind of a yuckier one to round off. I mean, making that a 6, that's too much. You know what? I'm going to go 32.36. 4 sig figs probably gives me that 3 sig fig breathing room that you were asking about. So I'll go 32.36. Okay. Now I need to plan my attack. In fact, what I'm really asking is, I'm going to solve this vertically or horizontally. Here's how I teach my students. When there is no guidance, when I'm not quite sure where to go next, I actually draw a line down the middle of the page. And I label one side horizontal and one side vertical. And as soon as I write horizontal, Enzo, right away I write AX equals 0. And as soon as I write vertical, right away I write AY equals negative 9.8. I can't call that a no-brainer because you have to know some physics to know that. But in this course, that's as close to a no-brainer as we'll ever have, where we can say you can do that, you can do that. As long as you're on the Earth, you're good. And I'll add any other vertical or horizontal stuff. Oh, I know Vx was 15.18. And I know Vy initial is 32.36. Duncan, why did I put an initial on the Vy but not on the x?
Because Vx is constant.
I'm still emphasizing that there's no acceleration horizontally. I'll use every trick that I can to emphasize that. And it's also less writing.
I think it was a 7-8.
7-8? Thank you. Didn't scroll up enough. I saw that. No, what did I see? I saw...
It was like a time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Greg, how many things do I have in column 2? Sorry, how many things do I have in the first column, column 1? How many in the second column? Not enough. I want to find, by the way, what did I say we're actually trying to find? It said find the range, but what did I say we're going to spend most of our time finding? Okay. There has to be something else they told me. What else did they tell me, Doug? What type of displacement? They gave me a vertical height. How high is the cliff?
45.
So they gave me dy. So Doug, am I going to write down dy equals 45? Say no.
No.
Why not?
That's where it started. You're ending up below where you started.
Why negative? Greg, I think you said negative, did you? Why negative? Because you're ending up where? Below from where you started from, and it's a displacement. So now this year, I think in your big review package, or it might be one of your homework, there is a question where you start out on the ground and you end up on top on a cliff, and so there you would have a positive displacement. Give me a second here, I need to pause. So there will be a question this year where your projectile, don't write this down, does something like this and it lands up there, there you would have a vertical positive displacement because you're ending up above. And otherwise it's exactly the same. For now, we said we're trying to find time, and we will continue next class. Have a great long weekend, folks.